because let's face it, one good axe blow and that would shatter. So, and then do you actually take it off, grind the rivet away and make a better cross guard? But in this case, not, because it's not a combat weapon. It's never going to be used in combat. So it's a nice, tough weapon. And another thing, what I don't like about it is that it's lined with some kind of padded rubber rather than having the helmets fold down. Spooky. Naughty Anglo-Saxon helmet. Behave yourself. What I don't like about it is that it has a rubber inside rather than sheepskin. Whether that's because it's come from abroad and they're not allowed to use fur inside, I don't know. So anyway, the Ulf Edna and Viking Berserkers, did they really exist? Was they a thing? And what would make a Viking Berserker go mad and crazy and fight a really good fight? I mean, I think it's a fascinating, whole idea and concept. And, and Viking and Berserker rage, was it a thing? Well, we certainly know there's enough accounts when it comes to the Viking sagas, and certainly when it comes to Egil's saga, one I know quite well. And I've been threatening to tell on the channel for many years, but it takes such a long time to actually learn the saga. And if I did it chapter by chapter, it would also take a long time. But I'm not giving up on the idea, but that's my problem, not yours. So certainly when Egil fought Lejot, the Viking Berserker, and Egil Skallagrimsson, beat him because the Berserker was taking people's land, he was fighting people, winning the battle, and then therefore they forfeited the land, and he ended up being quite wealthy. And in the end, his fate was doomed because he picked a fight with Egil Skallagrimsson, or a fight was arranged because Lejot was putting pressure on this Viking lady. At the moment, the name escapes me who she was. It'll come back to me. It's certainly a video that's been told on the channel. Egil's told it, and also the infamous Viking Niall Sigmundsson, the son of Sigmund, did a wonderful version. And perhaps one day I'll put a call out to him and ask him to come back and we'll film it in 4K. Because his version, if you've never seen that video on the channel, just when you finish this live stream, just go and type in, Egil versus Lejot. And if not, I remember, I'll create a community post and share that video out, because Niall Sigmundsson only recorded 2 videos for the channel, and his storytelling is wonderful. And of course, again, he's one of the very old guard Viking reenactors that's been doing it for so many years, much longer than I have, and therefore he's done a lot of things. But, did the Viking Berserkers actually exist? Well, we know from the sagas there's enough evidence to point in that sense. And, of course, you had bear berserkers, wolf berserkers, and you had the Ulf Edna, which, again, are just different type of berserkers. And were berserkers a really useful form of, infantry, or as we know it in the modern world, in a Viking army? Well, yes, they would, because they would go in, they would go berserk, they would be unstoppable in many aspects. And let's face it, if you're an Anglo-Saxon army and you got the main body of the Viking army in the shield wall, and then the berserkers come from the back and go to outflank the Saxons, that would probably terrify some of the Saxons. But also, was it also practiced, and did the early Saxons actually have berserkers? And that I can't really tell you at the moment without actually thinking about it and trying to remember. But so did Christianization of the Saxons actually kill that form of military, structure out of the Saxon army? Perhaps it did. And of course, the Saxons relied on organization, but they also relied on the fact that they could raise the fjord and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, and also raise a lot of men from the local villages and the towns. And as a Saxon, you had to fight and you had to train. It's very similar when it came to the 19th and 18th century in America, especially in the 18th century, when you had the Minutemen structure, because all the men in the local villages would get together once a week. They would practice drill, practice shooting their muskets, because in those periods it was muskets and not, percussion muskets like we see it today. So the flintlock based muskets, even some of them would have had dog locked, which is a much earlier version, but they would have been knocking about still. And so it's very similar to them and their structure. So the local Saxon villagers, and this probably was the same in also in Viking culture, because you had to get together and train every week, and you had to have the ability to practice, because let's face it, the more you practice in a shield wall, the better your shield wall is going to be, and the better you're going to be in battle. And that's certainly true when it came to reenactment, and my experience as a former training officer and a former master at arms. When we trained every week or every 2 weeks, and we had a good number of people turning up, 20 to 30 warriors at the training event, and that did happen quite a lot. We got to the point where we became really, really well. And one of the things me and a guy called Ravy Dave used to do was actually test the shield wall. So we would make sure that all the men and the women warriors too formed the shield wall. And then we'll get a 9-foot spears and we'll jab the shield wall. We'll look for weaknesses, but we'd also run against it. So we'll take a good running jump and jump into the shield wall to test for weakness, to try to see whether we could smash the shield wall and get through. And at first it was sloppy because we didn't overline the shields properly. And if you don't overline the shields properly in formation, you can have a weakness and you can sometimes push your way through. So of course, the more you practice, the better you would have got. And I think that's just pretty amazing, really. And the speculation is, the Viking Berserkers got themselves in a rage for the use of magic mushrooms, whether that's a myth, whether that's a true thing. I reckon it's got a basis of truth to it, but would it been done all the time? Because, magic mushrooms or any kind of hallucinogenic plant, let's say they couldn't find mushrooms and they found a source of ergot of rye in the summertime and the wheat was too wet, because when you get a lot of wet weather when you're growing wheat or barley, you can sometimes get the mold of ergot growing on the wheat, and that is a very hallucinogenic. It's fundamentally where LSD came from, or is an aspect of it. So could they have got themselves into a state not using magic mushrooms? Well, again, yes, because we know in shamanic cultures, through repetitive drumming and meditation and also chanting and doing all these sort of things, it heightens your spirit. So you could also raise your spirit and that level of things into a rage. But of course, a lot of this is speculation because we just don't have all the sources, because of the fact that they didn't write so many things down, and a lot of things they did write down, like a lot of sagas, have just been burnt and disappeared and been lost to time, and it's a shame. So we have a comment here. How are you doing, mate? Yeah, I'm doing good actually. Yeah, I had a good night out last night because my local medieval pub, which the building goes back 900 years, reopened with two of my friends at the home being the landlord and landlady. And I was planning to go down with my neighbours, but they've gone away for the weekend, which is lovely. I love to do that and go away for the weekend. And I think this weekend it's the Worcester Re-enactment weekend, which is a multi-period event. If I was a bit more organised, had a little bit more spare cash, and I would have probably by now joined up the American Civil War Society, but I'm kind of saving that for next year when I've got myself in a better situation and I got myself, so I'm putting the trainers on because I got to go out at about 22:09 just to meet somebody. And then I'm also planning a adventure tonight as well, but that's another story, but we'll see. So yeah, I mean, and that's yeah, so I had a good night last night. I had some lovely beers, but I'll tell you a little story about last night. This more relates to history, because history is all around us. It's under the ground. It really is. Wherever you go, wherever you live, there's always history buried. And because I come from a place called Alistair, which is a very old village going back to the medieval times, and there would have been a person named something like Alistair, and so the place is named after a person and a tree. And the tree is a very old yew tree, which is in the churchyard and said to be, 700 or 800 years old at least, because it's, massively thick. It's got to have a 2 or 3. It's got to be at least 1.5 meters trunk in diameter. And of course, a lot of yew trees in churchyards just never got chopped down because they're classed as sacred. And again, a lot of churchyards and a lot of churches are built on much older structures. So perhaps the church in Alistair, not far from me, which is about 200 meters in that direction, maybe a little bit more, maybe that's built on an old Iron Age site and a place of worship. But like a lot of this, Yeah, and the Celts did love the yew trees and the trees in general, and that's so massive in Celtic mythology. And it's definitely something I've been reading up about, and I want to tell more tales. I'm building up a Celtic impression. I've got, I've just got to do a little bit of sewing, make some trousers. I very recently, when I went dumpster diving, got a very nice curtain made from wool. And I tell you what, the fabric of the curtain, if I had it here now, you look at it and you say, wow, that's Celtic, that is. So I'm definitely going to think about either converting that into a cloak or maybe a set of trousers. I'm not decided yet, but I'm definitely going to be one of those things which I'm going to film on camera and try to film more crafting and more me making things, because I want to share the knowledge I have when it comes to making stuff. And I tell you what, I really do love making cloaks. I probably don't need another Iron Age cloak. I've got one which is made from a very nice Irish linen, and I don't know if I made a mistake with it, because I've lined it with some nice white linen, so it's white on the inside and checkered on the outside. But because I wanted it to be a little bit thicker, and because at the time I had a bit of felt spare, and felt is just wool that's been matted together, I put a lining inside of it of felt to make it thicker. And I don't know whether it's fundamentally worked out, but cloaks are so easy to make, and I certainly got enough, recorded data, because whenever I saw a cloak on camp, I always had a tape measure on me, and I measured a lot of people's cloaks, and I wrote down the measurements, so I knew in inches how big their cloak was. And and I think another important question when it comes to cloaks: can a cloak be too small? Well, yes, of course, because you certainly want a cloak that fits you. If you're, for instance, wearing a cloak that would fit a child, and I certainly had one at some point, but I left it round at turkeys. It was too small for an adult, but also you can go for the opposite size, and you can have a cloak which is too big. In fact, when you see me filming a live streaming downstairs, in the background I have a very old knackered cloak with lots of holes in it, and it was very cheap on eBay. It was only about I think it was about £7.50, and the only reason why I brought it because the inside of the cloak is just full of big holes where it's just no good, but all the way around the edge is tablet weave, and that tablet weave is worth quite a bit of money in aspect of buying it brand new. So I certainly got my money's worth. But I just left it as a massive, and it really is a massive cloak. It's way too big to be used as a cloak. But then again, we look at people when they get married and they have oversized wedding dresses. Is it the kind of same thing that as a Viking or Saxon, you're wearing an oversized cloak because in theory you could double it over and reduce the size of it? I could in theory wear it, but it's sort of a tatty cloak. It really wants cutting up at some point, but I just never got round to doing it. So yeah. And we have a comment here from Offer10. Good evening, Braggy and chat. Well, good evening, folks. Do please like the live stream. It's always important that you like the live stream. I'm currently upstairs in my upstairs little studio, which is also my bedroom as well, to be fair. And I'm sitting on my sofa, which I've prepared today because I've got this new idea for videos on the channel, which I'm thinking about filming. But I got to also try to think if I come up with a new series, and this is quite a new series. It doesn't really relate to history, but I like to try to think of a series and try to relate it back to the history so it keeps you guys interested. But I've got a massive passion for artificial intelligence, and I've also got a lot of insight when it comes to how artificial intelligence is going to develop. And it makes you think what the Vikings would think of artificial intelligence. It would completely blow their mind. They would say it's some kind of gift of Loki or some creation of the dwarves, wouldn't they? But I was talking to my AI today, and I'm talking about, well, will AI get to the stage when it becomes conscious and has a subconscious and start dreaming? And that, I think, is a fascinating concept, but that's moving away from what we're talking about today. So let's just go back and read your comments. So here you often see yew trees around churches because these places were once considered sacred by pagans, and churches were built on those sites. Aha. Well, yes, that's very, very true. And I think there's a very high percentage of churches have been built on sacred sites that would go back to the Celtic period and the Iron Age. And yes, of course, yesterday was the midsummer in the Norse tongue. So happy midsummer to everybody. Hope you had a lovely evening. And now we're at the point, and that was such an important aspect to all our ancestors, because it's the turning point where we have your longest day, when it comes to sunshine, and now the hours are going to start dwindling away, and we're slowly going to end summer in 2 months, 6 weeks, might be a bit longer, 2 months, and then of course we're going to go into autumn and winter. And I do actually love the autumn, and I do actually love the winter as well. And very, very rarely do I get a little bit wintry when it comes to having to stay inside more, but I don't mind that. I like all the seasons, but I also really love that part of the spring when everything starts to pop alive. When it comes to gardening, I just find the winter to be a lot easier to deal with in my garden. And again, hopefully I'll get into it. And I quite like the idea which somebody suggested in the comments, if I'm wearing chainmail, I'll do a bit of gardening. So I might bring that to the channel. Yeah. So yes, there's definitely a skull for the equinox, folks, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you celebrate it. And I certainly went out yesterday. I had with my friend, the lady from Alistry, who you sometimes see in the chats on these videos. As I invited her out because I don't like drinking on my own. I don't really know that many people, even though I can go to a pub and talk to strangers. And I'd always like a bit of company, and we had a bit of a laugh. I had 4 lovely pints, and then I got talking to a guy called Scott. But let me read the latest comment, and then I'll tell you about this fascinating chat I had, which goes back to the Roman period of history. And this lovely guy started talking to me and my friend, the lady from Alistry, as a or Shining Light is a YouTube name, not a YouTuber. She's just a big fan. And she always calls me Braggy, and I always love it when in real life people go, "All right, Braggy, all right, Braggers." I love that. So it's like my Viking personality. It really is. And somewhere around this house, I've got my Thor's hammers, but I don't know where they are at the moment. I've got to find them before I go out. So Dos Pulgasson Empero, and I hope I pronounced that right. I really need to get my glasses for some days and wear them. They're not my glasses. I took them out of a charity bin, but they're just a charity waste bin, and they're just they got the perfect lenses for and reading. As I can see, actually things are quite sharp, and it just helps me when I'm looking at my phone, but it does make a bit of a difference. But he says, Braggy, I've always wondered, are you a scholar? You really seem to know a lot about European history and Norse culture. Well, no, actually, I'm not a scholar. I don't have a degree. I don't have a PhD or a master's. The only scholar on the channel, or the 2 scholars really, are Tirk, who has a degree in Old English literature. That was his specialty. And then our former and late and great channel host, Egil Thorson, or Cy Carter in the real world, was an archaeologist and studied at York University under people like Dr. Martin Carver and some of these really excellent archaeologists. And Egil dug at the Jorvik site during Coppergate in the 80s. He went down with Martin Carver in the 1980s to dig up Sutton Hoo, because he often talks about how he warned people, you've got to be so careful at Sutton Hoo because it used to be a training site for the military. So there you are digging, in the ground looking for some Anglo-Saxon remains, and you find a big mortar shell. And so, in that situation, you have to be careful. So no, I'm not a scholar. I would really love to do a degree in history, and I do have a lot of knowledge because, I've met a lot of people. And certainly at times I get things wrong because I don't have all that knowledge, but because I've taught so many people, because I've read so many books, and because I've been working on this channel now for nearly 8 years, which is going to be our 10th anniversary on the 10th of July, or sorry, our 8th anniversary. I'm aging the channel by 2 years there. I've often thought about it, and I think it would have been a lot easier to do a degree, for 3 years or 4 years, however long, than it is to do a channel like this. So, and a lot of videos always used to joke about us being professionals, but I'm fundamentally the unprofessional. I was always the guy behind the camera. I was always the man that did the editing and created the thumbnails, even though a lot of them are not brilliant. I did a load last year and they weren't too good, and I got to redo them all again. It was another job, and then I got to redo a lot of the descriptions, and I've got to redo a lot of the titles, so the titles are more curiosity based. And I think also some of the videos want the beginnings on the old days cutting out, just to get rid of some of the stuff we don't want at the beginning of the video just to get in the hook. Because in the old days, when me and Eggle and TK were filming, we used to, go, oh, hello and welcome to Northworthy Sagas and Stories. Now, please do go and check out our Reddit site and leave us a subscription. And so that's dead space when it comes to a beginning of a video, because people don't do that anymore. And of course, that's the learning process. I tend to do that at the end of the video, but also I don't want to have it too long of an emphasis on trying to get people to subscribe at the end of the video. I just want to be short and snappy. And whilst I'm here, I have in the last 2 days gone and created a new merch shop. So do go and check out our merchandise. I think there's over 40 products now, and some of the products are also multicoloured. So if you wanted a Eggle Thorson Ruff Baby t-shirt or a Dave the Cat t-shirt, and you wanted it in green or blue or grey or black or white, those options are there for. And do let me know about the prices, because I can lower the prices, but the lower I lower the prices, the less money I'm going to make on it. But I do have a little bit of play. I can play on some of the merchandise, and of course it's a fantastic way for you guys to get a product with the Northworthy logo, couldn't quite say logo then, or a picture of Eggle, or a cartoony logo. And I'm developing more logos. I got quite a few I've made in the last few months, last few weeks actually. I did start one shop, and I got to delete that shop at some point, but you can't delete it on the app, which is a fourth rule shop, because they seem quite popular, and I can't afford to get a Shopify shop, which I would prefer to have, but that takes a subscription, and again it's money, and I need to have money to spend the money. So do check out our merch, and it does really help to to sponsor, and because all the money I make from the channel is fundamentally going to go back in the channel, and this is a full-time job for me. So I'm doing it 7 days a week. I literally don't get a day off really, and the reason why I do that is because I love what we do. So you're doing a degree in history yourself. That's amazing. I love that. I always got respect for people that do degrees and go into further education, because it's such an important thing. And you have a voice too, so perhaps in the future I can start inviting people in the vertical format to come and join me in a live stream, and then we can bounce off each other, and you can talk about your aspects of early history, because I do know a lot about the history you're studying, but I'm also prepared and want to learn more. In a minute I will get back to that story about what happened last night. I'm not forgotten. And it's these live streams are never fundamentally planned. I just go along with the flow. I'll read your comments, answer your questions, and then I'm trying to get a little bit better with the live stream, so they're a little bit more organized and a little bit more structured. So you get what the video title is about. I've talked a bit about that, and perhaps we'll go back to that in a few minutes. Then Offer 10 says, what are the mysterious historical gaps in Scandinavia is from the years 350 to 500 AD. Well, surely as we're, archaeology, is digging more into the ground, surely we're going to get the answers to that in Scandinavia, and, fill more of the gaps and have more of that information, because we know an awful lot about the period from 500 to 793 with the Vendel Age, which is the rough date. And of course, the Vendel Age is not a culture. It's not a culture or people. It's an age, and it's just a pre-Viking age. It's the pre-Norse, but they're still Norse at the same time. And of course, our legendary channel host TK has some lovely Vendel helmets, and really expensive ones, not the cheap one, but you can get, you can spend £500 to £1,000 and get yourself a relatively cheap Vendel helmet, which I'll probably have to do in the future, more towards the top end. And if we start making a lot of money on the channel, then I can start buying, a cheap Coppergate, and we'll smash that in with an axe. We'll buy a cheap Vendel helmet, and we'll test that with bows and arrows once we get a bow, and we'll test it with sharp spears and see whether they survive. I'm just not prepared to do it with that helmet, because that's really expensive, and that helmet as well. And then we can also order more equipment and show you guys more things, but also develop different impressions And what I mean by impressions is, so we could have a early Saxon impression, we could go for a Vendel impression, we could develop a Anglo-Norman impression, we could, at some point when I've got a couple of grand spare, I could order a suit of armour and do 13th and 14th century, for instance, and add that to the channel, which I think would be a wonderful thing to do. And then Das Pers Gasson Pero, perhaps to call you Pero, it might be easier. A lovely name as well. Yeah, pre-Viking Norse history is quite interesting too. Oh, it's fascinating, but it's got so many comparisons to the Anglo-Saxon history as well. When you look at, the Sutton Hoo helmet, and then you look at the Vendel helmets. But there is some speculation about the Sutton Hoo helmet that it wasn't made in England, it was actually made in Scandinavia or somewhere like Denmark or Germany. And there's a lot of speculation about that. And again, they're still discovering things about the Sutton Hoo helmet. Like a few years back, 3 or 4, they discovered that the eyebrows, which have, the garnets in, one of them's darker than the others, and it kind of represents the god Odin. And that's fascinating. And perhaps we should do a video on that itself. And then Orion still says, what languages do you speak? Well, I mostly speak English, and not always brilliantly, because I grew up and I didn't speak till I was 4.5, and I had a speech impediment. So because of that, because I spoke too fast and I was rubbish at my R's and my W's, which to a certain degree I still am, that always left me behind a little bit. But I've self-taught myself, and I read literally well over 2,000-3,000 books in the last 30 years, because I love reading, and some books I've read 2 or 3 times. There's always a few classic books which I just love to read, like Jaws. If you never read the book Jaws, a brilliant book by Peter Benchley, or some of the Ian Fleming books, Bond, were also really easy to read, and Ian Fleming was such an amazing writer. But that's a whole entire subject for another day. And I do speak a little bit of Norse, and I'm trying to learn Saxon, and I'm trying to pick up more words every day and learn more of that. But of course, it takes so much. And, I wish I could just have the ability to learn a language like in a few hours or a few months, like some people do. But it's all about that learning curve, and it's all about adapting and learning more words as you go along. But, how many words in English do we not use? There's literally thousands of words in English, and or Old Anglish, or Old Anglish, and we don't fundamentally use them every day. And of course, lots of words go out of fashion. And then we have a comment here from Leonard, a roller. Was magic mushrooms mixed with the mead and drums? Well, some people do speculate that they made mead, or they had it mixed with the mead, and certainly that could be a thing, because I can remember Turkey or somebody talking about on camp when somebody brought some mead and it had been mixed with magic mushrooms. I think it will be either fly garrick or liberty caps, and they could recall seeing dragons in the sky. And I think that used to be a thing when it was more legal back in the day. People used to make mead and put magic mushrooms in it in the process of making it. So that's probably a very old thing, because let's face it, if you're brewing ale or you're brewing mead or you're making mead, having that ability to put herbs in is a wonderful thing. And I love some of these German herbal tonics. There used to be one, I can't remember, called like Schmidt or something like that, and I used to buy it, and I didn't used to drink it for the pleasure of drinking it. I used to drink it when I had a cold or a cough. So, and there'd be like 30 different herbs in this alcoholic drink, and I must say, that's really, really nice stuff. And that's something that would have been practiced in England equally as much as Europe. And though a lot of the European cultures have kept that going, and they still make these herbal tonics or drinks, whatever you may call them, we don't really do that in the UK. I think we've lost that in our culture to a certain degree. And there's quite a few of them. You can go, I've been to Germany a few times, and I've always brought some bottles back. And I was always quite amazed by the variety you could get. And and perhaps in the future I'll buy a few bottles and do some reviews of some of these herbal alcoholic drinks from Germany and Europe. So it makes sense to have your magic mushrooms if you wanted to have that concoction. But whether that would be a regular thing, and of course, magic mushrooms are seasonal, so you couldn't really have it all the time. And of course, if you brewed it in ale, then it wouldn't last too long, and your ale would go off after a week. So you're constantly brewing and brewing ale all the time. And of course, the advantages of making and brewing mead, which I know personally because my dad used to be a beekeeper, and at some point I keep thinking to myself, well, perhaps I should, get some bees in the garden and invest in some hives, because I do have the knowledge to keep bees because I grew up with it. The amount of times I used to go out with my dad, and he would borrow the company van and take 10 hives of bees to another place where the field was full of rapeseed, and the bees would go and harvest all the pollen and make honey from that, and that's a wonderful honey. But honey doesn't go off, and neither does fundamentally mead if you store it right. In fact, I've got 4 gallons of mead that was made in the late 1970s, and although it's gone very, very dark, not like the golden mead you get, it's still very drinkable. And on special occasions, I do have it give it, it gets. In fact, I got an old friend of mine, not seen for a good while, called Paul, and then whenever he comes around, he always asks, "Oh, can I have some of that special mead you got?" And I don't know how my dad made it or did to it, but he made it very nice, and it's just something sacred I have in the house. And I do like a bit of mead now and again. And my favourite mead, if you ever want to go and buy any mead, and I think in the UK you can go to Morrison's, and Morrison's still have a home brand mead for sale, but the best mead you can ever buy is a mead called Moniac, and Moniac is just absolutely to die for. And they have such lovely like golden meads and special meads, and I think Moniac is made by some monks, I think, if I'm correct, and I still think it's around. It's more difficult to get hold of, but normally when you go to re-enactment events, there's always a mead tent, and I always try to buy a couple of bottles and bring them back home with me because it's just so nice, and I just love it. And again, it's really good for that special occasion on those ceremonies when you got to celebrate midsummer or you got a special guest coming round. But the advantage of putting magic mushrooms in the old days in mead, because it won't go off, and the honey would ferment and keep that mixture safe, as long as you store it in a safe place. And then many historians believe it may have to do with the Huns. Well, again, that's another fascinating culture in history as well as the Mongolians, but I think it was quite a widespread thing throughout many cultures, because many cultures had the availability to collect and have honey. And you think about honey these days and beehives, which are mostly made from wood, although you can also get these days, you can get self-tapping beehives where you can just open it up at the bottom and just get the honey coming out of the beehive. And I've seen some videos on this. Whether it works fundamentally or whether it lasts long, I don't know. And they're not the most cheapest beehive to buy. Traditionally, you'd have a beehive, then you have to take the cones out, wearing all the bee equipment, overalls, a hood and gloves, and make sure everything's tied up. What you don't want is bees getting up your sleeve and getting into your clothing, because then you're going to get stung. And some people are more allergic to bee stings than others. I mean, the amount of time my dad got stung, he probably became acclimatized to the fact that he would regularly get stung by bees, even to the fact where he wouldn't even wear gloves. And of course, you smoke them, so you get a smoker and you get some dampish, woodish material you light up, and then that smoke would calm down the bees. But also, you get beehives where the colony is very, very nasty, and you have to smoke them to calm them down, and that doesn't always work. So I got itchy nose. And if you ever had to deal with a beehive where the colony is a very nasty beehive, a very nasty colony, so it's one that will go for you in big times, you can certainly tell the difference from my experience of seeing a beehive that was very calm, was very happy to be worked with and to be managed by the beekeeper, compared to a beehive which had the opposite effect. You'll definitely be more careful about those bees. But traditionally, in the old days, they would have a kind of a basket made from straw rolled up, and then it will be formed into a kind of a dome shape. And I love to read up and find a little bit more history about beekeeping and how old it actually is in history. No doubt in my mind it goes way back to the Celtic period and probably even further back. But also people also collected honey from the wild. If you got and you knew on your land you had a wood and there's a number of bee colonies living in trees, you'd also, try to open up that tree, maybe create a fire so the smoke would raft up around the colony in the tree or in a cliff or wherever it's living, and then try to get the honeycombs out. But also you got to be careful not taking too much, because you don't want to damage the colony by taking out too much of what's inside, because you need to keep that colony going. And of course they rely on that to feed their own bees and to feed their young and to breed more bees, because worker bees only got a lifespan of a few weeks, if I'm correct. And quite luckily I've got a lot of books in the house about beekeeping. But I think that's a whole entire and separate thing we've got to think about on the channel and maybe cover in the future. So Orion says, what do you think about the Sami? Well, the Sami people are just fascinating. It's amazing how they didn't get converted to Christianity, probably because there was more remote than the people that lived in Sweden and Norway and a certain part of Finland, but also the Finnish people and the Sami and the people in that area of the world also resisted to a certain degree, but they also kept their culture as well. So I really would love to go to and meet some Sami people and to also experience their shamanic culture and also just live with them for a while. I think that would be a fascinating thing to do. And, and I don't know enough about them. I need to read up more. If I could find some books in the future, then I'll definitely take some time to study. And definitely a part of the world I'd love to go to. And I just think it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating that, some of the native people in Russia, in what you call the Tiger area, which is very much a big wooded area full of lakes, and it's absolutely massive how they live in teepees or teepee structure, houses. Well, not houses, because they're nomads, so they move about and they follow the herd of reindeer. And I think that too is fascinating, how these cultures are still surviving in their tribal sense and living off the reindeer and traveling with the reindeer and moving about. So and there's a lot of there's a lot of sayings and talk about, well, should humanity have stayed nomads and not settled down like we have done? But if you imagine, if we go back in history and history changed and we remained to be nomads and we moved about and we didn't have a set home, how dramatically that would change the modern world. It would completely change it. And I think that too is also fascinating. And then Pero says, oh, wow, Old Norse or Icelandic Norse. I'm more familiar with Old Norse and Icelandic Norse. And I don't know if there's a vast difference between the two, but no doubt the Icelandic Norse probably developed in its own sense because of the fact that it was a separate island. And of course, Icelandic culture and the Icelandic sagas are fascinating, and all the feuds and all of the, and the fact that, the Norwegians travelled there and people who got banished from Norway and Sweden decided to go and live in Iceland and form their own place. So that culture is fascinating. And again, another country I would really love to go to. And just a few weeks back I think it was on TikTok or Facebook, somebody invited me to go to an Icelandic festival and said, we'll put you up and we'll feed you and give you a drink and just get a flight over. So I'd love to do that as well, and then go explore some of these famous places from the sagas from Iceland and go and record a few videos and record that history for you guys, because I think that is fascinating. And I'm sure as somebody very much into Norse culture, I would get a warm welcome. And then Pero says, you have a beautiful garden, very lush. Oh yeah, it's my dad's old garden, to be fair. It's got a little bit overgrown, but in the same sense, it's just got a little bit wilder, but not too bad in the sense of it being, Like you see some gardens when you just can't get in the garden because of the amount of brambles, and it's a bit like the Forth Bridge really, because I'm constantly trying to go in and work on the garden, and I definitely need to get in there. But at the moment, it's just way too hot. It's it's 30 degrees today, and I don't like it when it's too hot. And yeah, I just and it's even worse when you're trying to sleep at night. I mean, I think hot weather should be for your holidays when you're going to Ibiza or the Canary Islands or Turkey. Yeah, that's when you want it hot. But then how would the Saxons and the Vikings have coped with hot weather? But then again, they would have been probably more climatized because they was outside a lot more than what we were. Because people do stay inside. I've not really been outside too much today because I've been working on videos. I've edited a couple of long format videos because I'm constantly trying to grind away on the channel. And I've got a lot of videos I've got in hand, which I filmed over the last few weeks. So I'm trying to get those videos ready and just prepare more videos for the future. And I've done a few comments. I've answered to a few comments, but I need to do more of that because I'm constantly trying to catch up. So if you left a comment and you're not seeing me reply yet, I do apologise, but do bear with me because I do go through the comments and I do try to, in time, answer comments. And then I'm also going way back in time on the channel, like 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I'm just hunting down comments I've not replied to. But there seems to be a bit of an error with YouTube at the moment because some days I'll see a comment and it will say 4 replies. But when I click on the little rectangular round box, I can't see those 4 comments. Then I can't tell whether I replied to those comments myself. And I don't know whether that's a YouTube problem. It must be an error on YouTube. It's a little bit frustrating. So yeah, and of course, what I love about where I live is that, we've got all this history of the channel where, me and TK filmed, and me and TK filmed, and TK left the channel. Then Eggle, a few months later, came on the channel and we formed a new age on the channel, the Eggle and Braggy age. And so there's a lot of history when it comes to the channel. Who knows, one day in 100 years, the house still exists in the garden. I may get a blue plaque saying, oh, famous YouTuber Braggy Magnusson lived in this house. Because will we see that one day? I do wonder. And there are quite a few blue plaques in the area. And if you go in that area 2-3 miles, there's lots of famous authors and writers and poets lived in Derby. And quite a lot of houses do have blue plaques. And if you don't know what a blue plaque is, in the UK, if your house or where you live has an historical meaning or somebody from history lived in that building, then the council and English Heritage and the heritage people tend to put a little blue plaque on your house so it's remembered. And I think I really love that. And it certainly is something I could actually go around and film some of these blue plaques and actually talk about it, do a little bit of research and make some short videos and maybe some long format videos. Because it's also about respecting that knowledge because so many wonderful people have lived in Derby. And of course, all over the UK, you'll find them. And there's also a lot of World War II history. There's lots of places in Derby where you can see where all the railings got took down in between 1943 and 44 when the government decided to go and take down all the railings of iron and steel. And they say that they collected 1 million tons of iron. But there's a bit of a conspiracy about all this collecting of iron railings because there's no accounts actually in all the ironworks of ever the railings ever actually going to the ironworks. There's some speculation that actually the iron wasn't good enough quality, but that's not fundamentally true because you can get iron, you can put it in a big crucible, melt it down, and then you can purify it and make it into a better quality iron, or even upgrade it to a steel. And that's fascinating. And of course, if you go about Derby, you'll find pillboxes, you'll find Roman remains. And before I do finish, I'll mention about this guy I talked to last night who's invited me around his house to go into his basement. But I'll tell you that in a minute. Let me catch up with the comments. And then Opper10 says, Braggy, do you have any experience with clothing from Celtic Red Merchant? No, but this came from Celtic Red Merchant, this Romano-British sword from the, it'll be 5th to 6th century. But also, I'll be able to use this as very early Anglo-Saxon migrational. And I must say, it's a lovely blade. and you'll see the video tonight where I've unboxed it, although I didn't have the box because I got rid of the box, and then it's just for some long reason, which one day I may reveal, it just stayed in my house wrapped up in cellophane, and I'm sure you agree, and the handle is very nice as well. So yeah, not so far. I've not had any experience with clothing when it comes to Celtic Red Merchant. I know that some of it will be quite nice and authentic, but what you just have to look out for when you're buying clothing is that you don't buy it in cotton, because cotton is a much later thing. And, you know, in reenactment terms, especially in the 19th century, we use the term farby, F-A-R-B-Y. We don't really use it when it comes to the medieval period. But what farby fundamentally means, it just stands for far be it from the war. It's a phrase coined if you're going along and you're wearing, you know, you're doing American Civil War, or you're doing, you know, you might say the 7 Years War, or you're reenacting the French Indian War or the American War of Independence, and you know you turn up with something that doesn't belong in that period, or you turn up with an item which isn't authentic looking, hasn't been made properly. So that's what that meaning stands for. In fact, there's a video that me and Eggle made about 7 years ago or 6 years ago explaining what farby means. And if I ever remember, I will share the link to the Facebook group I belong to, where it's a group dedicated to sharing pictures of reenactors that don't look right and while wearing one kit. And you do see some very funny pictures, and now and again I do download them and make them into a caption competition, because I just think they're quite funny. And you know, it's like you're seeing, you know, American Civil War soldiers arriving into battle in a US Willys Jeep. You know, it didn't happen. And then you see some of these, what we used to call and class as what you call plastic fantastics. But what do I mean by that phrase, a plastic fantastic? Well, it's a reenactor who's gone and bought a uniform from one of these costume places, and they just look absolutely rubbish and ridiculous. But I think the most funniest thing I ever saw on whilst I was reenacting the American Civil War, which is something I want to bring to the channel in the future, but not just me, because I know a lot of awful people and I'm very highly respected in that community. And we'll cover singing, we'll cover the history, because a lot of people say, well, the American Civil War has got nothing to do with Europe or England or Britain, but it has, it really does. And I really want to emphasize that and teach you guys and educate you guys about that war, because it was such a brutal, but also an amazing war as well in many aspects. Not that any war is amazing, because they're not, but the amount of people that died, if you had all the American wars since in between, you're never going to come anywhere near the amount of people that died. But that's a subject for another day. But definitely, I'm definitely thinking with my friend Jim, and maybe joining, either becoming a part of staff again, and whether I'd have a rank, I don't know, because if you've got 3 bars on your shoulders or you're wearing pips, you generally have a responsibility. And you know, I was always thrusted into that role because I got so much experience when it comes to leadership, and that war has just fascinated me, and that's how I started reenacting. So we'll cover that. So yeah, at some point I will actually go and buy some clothing from Celtic Red Merchant. And when I bought this sword with my Anglo-Norman sword and my Germanic sea axe, they did have a bit of a problem send it to me, because they kind of forgot, and they, you know, they tried to send it to me and it got bounced back by customs and went back to them. But Celtic Red Merchant were very kind. They actually sent me a whole refund, which was over £200 worth, but they still sent me the items. So in that aspect, I think they're a very good company. But certainly amongst all of us, we need to get our heads together and create a very good, authentic list of traders, blacksmiths, silversmiths, people that can manufacture clothes, hand sew clothes, whether you want to buy a cheaper set or whether you want to go and spend a good amount of money and buy a proper hand sewn set. And certainly if I had the time and the fabric, I could certainly make you a few cloaks, because cloaks are dead easy to make. I mean, you know, if anybody wants to send me some wool, if you send me some excess wool so I can get something out of it, I would fundamentally, for a small price, make you a cloak. and even in theory make you a tunic or a pair of trousers, and then film it in a process and do it live on camera. So at some point when I've got the spare cash, I'm going to start buying more equipment from these traders, because I want to see what some of this kit, when we call it kit, but it's a modern reenactment term, but I do want to try that so that I can recommend, then we can find ourselves the best traders so that you guys can get better kit. And then amongst the whole community we have on this family we've grown on this channel, we can help each other out and say, yes, this trader's really good, avoid this trader, like Grimfrost. I saw some of the items at Grimfrost are probably very, very good, but some of them are just very farby, and I would avoid. But until I get to the stage where I actually buy some stuff from them, but apparently they don't now sell to the UK and don't ship things to the UK, which is a bit of a sad loss. We do need to work on getting a a bit of a good list of traders together. And then we have a comment here from Orion. It says, Samai is a Fedoscandia. So that's the other word for the Sami, is it, I think. And then we have a comment here from Baron Faber. Yeah, do you like Celtic Web Merchant? They have Viking weapons. I don't know whether they sell combat weapons. I've got to look into that, really. But I do know one of the big fans of the channel and a friend of the channel, Martin from Belfast, he's been buying from them for years. And if you see Martin in the comments, go and check out his YouTube channel, because, and do give him a subscription as well. He's got a lot of videos where he shows off a lot of this stuff he's bought from Celtic Web Merchant, and he highly recommends them. In fact, in tonight's video, if you go to tonight's long format video, I think there's a comment from Martin saying, I've been buying from them for years. So if I remember, I'll pin it for a few days before I go and actually write a call to action comment, and I've got loads of them to do. And of course, there's never enough time. I need to get to the stage where I become wealthy and hire somebody to do a lot of this for me, because, as a content creator, I wear so many hats. There's a hat, I got lots of these I wear, whether I'm the host, whether I'm editing the videos, I'm directing the videos, I'm producing the videos, I'm doing the merchandise, I'm doing the PR. So I wear a lot of hats, in the sense of I got a lot of roles to do. And of course, a lot of people that run the channel like this will have a whole team of people, where I don't. It's just me. And some days it can be very overwhelming. So bear that with me in time. When I've got the money, it'll be next year, hopefully, things will improve. I'm going to start buying from traders, and then I'll recommend what you can get from them. And then also, it's about reviewing stuff on camera. And then Pero says, yeah, a lot of cultures use drugs to get high before battle. The Scythians, for example, use marijuana. Well, again, that's a fascinating thing, and we often forget about that. But what we don't understand, and people don't understand about modern drug use, is that, the reason why people take drugs and get high is because we've been doing it for thousands of years. So you think about all the cultures, all your relatives that probably at one point or another would have got high. And a lot of time, they weren't fundamentally doing it for the same sense we were, which is for pleasure, to escape. They was doing it as part of ceremonies, for instance, which we do know did happen. But if you try to, let's face it, we've had the anti-drug wars since the 1980s and probably going back a bit further. And why is it not working? Why have they not learned, the establishment, to eradicate drugs from society? And there's a very simple reason for this. It's because we've been taking drugs and getting high for thousands of years. And you just can't change and program people and our heritage overnight. It will take generations to stop us from wanting to get high. Because no matter what you do, no matter how much they push their anti-drug laws in the world and criminalise people, even to the point where they ruin people's lives, which has happened so much in the UK and happens so much in America, you just can't program people and change people. There will always be a percentage of people that will want to get high, and it's a bit like drinking with prohibition, because let's face it, that never worked, did it? Because there were probably more drinking going on in prohibition than there was actually drinking before prohibition. you just can't program people, and there's always going to be a percentage of people that want to do it. So, you know, we need to have a big think about the world we live in and the way we address these problems, because a lot of people take drugs and they live ordinary lives, and we always have this perception about people that take drugs that go out stealing and the bad people. Well, they're not. I've met people from every walk of life, whether, you know, even to the point of judges, and I've met people that are police officers that get high, and I've met, you know, people that are high ranking in society, but also been to the opposite end in that situation and met some of the lowest people in society that take drugs. And I'll tell you a couple of stories, but I do finish off talking about what happened last night, but I've not forgotten. And in some situations in the past, because I used to smoke marijuana myself, on and off throughout the years, because I had a lot of friends that did it, I've certainly been in situations where I've been with a friend to go and, you know, to go and buy some drugs, and the people that were buying drugs on think I'm a police officer undercover because I'm very knowledgeable. But do I look like an undercover police officer? I don't know. And I've always had long hair, and I've had to get myself out of that situation very quickly, because it's very quickly, in a matter of minutes, got very hostile. And luckily, because I'm well experienced in life, I know when to get myself out of there. And that's happened a few times in my life. I don't think I look like an undercover police officer, but certainly I've been in that situation. And of course, that's another aspect about drug taking, is that because it makes you a criminal, but nobody that smokes cannabis or takes ecstasy or whatever you may be taking wants to be a criminal. We don't see ourselves like that. And, you know, I don't partake anymore because, you know, I've done enough smoking in my time with smoking. I used to love cigars. I have made a video very recently, because I made that very funny viral video which had 1 million views, our most watched video now, talking about the, you know, the negative effects of cannabis. You know, 1, you have less cannabis. 2, I forget, which is just the whole pun of it. And you know, it's amazing the amount of comments we've had, but how many people have taken it to be a very serious video when it's not. It's a joke, people. It's a meme. It's meant to be funny. But because I felt bad in the sense of I need to address this situation, actually, you know, and make a serious video about it, I did. So I do urge you after the live stream to go and check out that video where I talked about cannabis and the pros and the cons. And I don't really want to get in that subject too much on the channel. And I'm sure I could if I really wanted to and make quite a few more videos. But it's a part of my mental health range of videos, because my audience is dominated by men, so we're 91% a male audience, and you know, a lot of younger men, you know, in their teens and in their 20s and in the 30s, really struggle in life. And as men, we don't like to talk about our problems. So as a content creator, I just feel it's my responsibility to talk about the bigger subjects in life and to help you guys and to open up this whole discussion about our mental health. You know, and it doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger to put your hand up, to have that integrity, which is something I probably need to learn a bit more about. Somebody be laughing right now. And it's all about helping you guys. And as I say in those videos, you know, and it's not about the views, although I'd love those videos to get high views, and I think they do have good views, most of them. And you will find a playlist I made already for it. And I've got my next video ready to go, which is about resilience. And resilience is a very old thing. And perhaps we'll do some live streams talking about mental health and some of the aspects of it, because I think that too would be quite useful. But it's about helping you guys, and you know, you may not have a voice, but I have a voice. And if I can help one person with each video, if I can help 10 people to become stronger, to become more resilient, and to become wiser in life, then I think we've done a good job. So let's just go back to your comments, because it's so important for us to actually, you know, to look at your comments and read your comments and take the time whilst we're still small as a content channel. Because at some point, if we ever do take off and we get 1 million subscribers and there's 1,000 people watching, you know, I don't know how I'm going to address reading all your comments. We'll have to do it through super chat. So if you've got an important question, you know, and it don't have to be a lot of money, just send me 50p and I'll read your comment out. But of course, it's all about supporting and helping the channel to grow. And the more, you know, and I never really like channels that go out and say, oh yes, do buy our merch, do give us a super chat, do you know, send us a PayPal donation, because I always thought that would be a bit cheesy. But at the same time, you know, running a channel like this costs money, and it costs me money and a lot of time. And I've literally spent tens of thousands of hours on this channel because I live and breathe it. But it's all about making a difference, and it's all about respecting our heritage and teaching people in a fun and educational way. If I could teach you and entertain you, but entertain you more, and you get taught on the side as a bonus, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So let's just go back to your comments. And then Orion says, I guess so, but they're still in Scandinavia. Yes, and I really would love to go to Scandinavia. And then Hashtag says, evening Braggy, evening Hashtag. And I've got to ask you guys, how are you guys tonight? Please do let me know in your comments how you are, because it's very important from my point of view, because you're my family, and it's important that I ask you that question. And, you know, what are you drinking? I've seen a lot of YouTubers do that. They say, oh, where you come from and what are you drinking? So, and Leonardo Roller says, and evening with them mixing, and even with the mixing, they still aren't Scandinavian. Well, no, fundamentally not, because they're our own culture. And Orion says, just because they aren't Scandinavian doesn't mean they didn't live in Scandinavia. Well, of course, they did live in Scandinavia, but it's a whole separate culture when it comes to the Scandinavian culture, because they didn't fundamentally go and raid England, and they weren't Norse. But again, I think the Sami are very underrated, and there's not enough information and videos about the Sami, and I really would love to address that, you know, in the time. And then Offer10 says, the Baron Faber, I've never bought from them, but I saw their website today. Lots of nice clothes there. Yeah, they do have a lot of nice things. And at some point, you know, we'll spend, you know, £500 and buy a lot of clothing, because I always need more clothing for the channel, because I like to vary the videos. And also it helps me to know when I've made a batch of videos because I'm wearing these clothes, but it also changes the thumbnails. And let's face it, Norse, Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian medieval clothing is so nice and so lush. And I wish we can get to the stage in the world where it became a modern thing and people went out wearing their, you know, their Viking or medieval Norse clothing, because then I'd probably go out every day and wear it. And it's so comfy, it's so cool in summer, and it's so long lasting and wearing, and it's so warm in winter because it's so adaptive. If you go out, you know, you wear jeans in the summertime, they're too hot. Same with your t-shirts, because they don't breathe like proper linen and they don't breathe like wool. And then Martin Hale says, what about hoods? Well, let's just cover that subject very quickly, because we do know, I think it's in Norway, they found a leather hood in a bog. So we do know they had hoods. Some reenactment groups will say to you, oh, no, hoods didn't exist and are not a thing, so we shouldn't be wearing them. But no, I think we did, and it's a practical thing to have. And I think wearing a hood is such an important garment or clothing item to have. And at some point, because I made the design, I made the patterns to actually make a leather hood rather than a wooden one or a linen one. And there are some very good manufacturers on Etsy. And there's a woman from, I think, down south in England that makes nice wooden hoods at a reasonable price, about £20. Me and Irit both bought one from her, and I must say, really nice. So at some point, when I get my act together, I will demonstrate on camera, as a part of my crafting series, make your wood a leather hood, because I think a leather one would be fascinating. And I can't remember the name of the find. It will come back to me. I'm sure one of you guys will probably know, remind me, but because, you know, I got so much information in my head, I can't remember everything. Oh yeah, then we got my friends here, Shine Your Light, who I went out with last night. So hello. Did you get my message? So I got to nip out very shortly, so I'll be ending this soon, but not quite yet. I'm either going to drive partly down or get the bus. I've got to look at my bus timetable. I meant to mention last night, Braggy, that I'm a seamstress. Hand sewing is so relaxing and satisfying. Well, perhaps, you know, I could give you some, you know, some projects to do, and I'll probably even pay you for it if you really want some money for sewing me some, you know, some tuna. And I do have a lot of wool, which I've had for many years, and I never quite got round to it. And of course, if you're designing or making an item, you must make sure when you get your piece of wool that you nest your patterns correctly, because what you don't want to do is get a nice big bit of wool and then just use the centre bit for your tunic and then end up with offcuts you can't use. So the idea, and the same with leather work, you must learn, and it's so important, I can't stress this enough, that you must learn to nest your patterns and maximise the amount of stuff you can get out of a sheet of leather, a hide, or a good length of fabric. So for instance, out of a good length of fabric, let's say it's 3 meters by 1.5 meters, you should in theory be able to get yourself a good pair of a good cloak. You should be able to make yourself a hood, some leg bindings, and 4 or 5 hats easily. And it's very important that you think about that. And again, this will be something we will address in the future, and I'll show you. So yeah, and then Martin Hale says, try armour class for swords. Yes, I always do recommend armour class. You do have to wait a little bit of time, but for a budget combat blade, they are very good. In fact, I had an ex-girlfriend called Alison, who was a Viking, and I've not spoken to her for 20 years. It's funny how ex-girlfriends don't talk to you. And very occasionally I do use her pictures in some of the videos, and I don't know if she'll be horrified over that, but they're my pictures, I do what I want with them. But she had an armour class sword, and I must say it was really, really nice. And I know, I think the sword that Neil uses is an armour class, and they do have some very nice Saxon blades, Norse blades, and also some Anglo-Norman. So again, and I did speak to him about 2 years back, but I decided to order a sword from Celtic Red Merchant because I had to wait a few months and I didn't want to wait. But it's always worth sending an email to Armour Class and asking if they've got any in stock, then you won't be waiting so long. So yeah, again, at some point in the future, I'm going to order, 4 or 5 swords from Armour Class, and then we'll review them. And I think my friend Jim is up for doing combat, so I'm hoping to bring combat back to the channel with Jim, because I trained him up many years ago. As he thanked me the other day when I saw him and said, this is the guy that trained me to be a warrior, because I trained lots of people over the years. But it'd also be quite interesting to get somebody brand new who's never done any combat and also train them. And then Perro says, ha, what the hell? I'm not sure what you're referring to. And Aaron Kelly, so hello Aaron, says interesting. Shiny Light says, yeah, you look like an undercover warrior. Well, yeah, well, I always go out with Thor's hammers on, and people often say to me, oh, yeah, you wear the Thor's hammer. And it's always nice to see people, recognising what it is. But it is a very recognised message. And then Aaron Kelly says, and then Shiny Light says, I'm pissing in my pants. Integrity, no soul, less than braggy. Oh, yes, I'm trying to learn. And then Shiny Light, and that's a catchphrase. We should have that on the t-shirt with your face on, I think, Ellie. And it's tip-top, toppity toe. And you also get me out of the habit of saying good morning to people, because I now have been to think to myself, oh, glad tidings instead. I'm good. I had trouble with my lawnmower this week, which sucks because that's partly where I make money. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And if you ever need your lawnmower blade sharpening, just send me a batch and I'll sharpen them up razor sharp for you, because I'm really good at sharpening things because of all the years of engineering. That's fundamentally my livelihood was I was an engineer. And Aaron says, lots of medieval tapestries say hoods were a thing. Yes, I completely agree with you. And I got no doubt about it in my mind, 110 million%, that hoods were a thing. Because we certainly know that the Celts had hoods. So why would we not go from the Celtic period into the, up to the Viking age? So why would the hoods disappear? They wouldn't. And it's the same with tattooing, even though there's not a lot of evidence within the Viking world that they had tattoos. But we certainly know that, the Bronze Age and the Celtic Age and the Neolithic were tattooing, in people. It's a bit like, the Alpine man Etsy, who had tattoos related to his medical treatment he had, which is also fascinating. But why would tattoos disappear from the Celtic period and the Roman period, and then later on in the medieval, much later period, come back in? So in my mind, it don't make sense, and I think that they do exist and would exist. And again, that would be another wonderful impression to get, would be a Robin Hood impression. So, of course, a very typical example in the 13th and 14th century that hoods were a thing, and I don't see why not. But anyway, how's my hair looking? I sometimes often forget to comb my hair, but I'm doing well today. So on that point, I'm going to have to say goodbye because I got to go. I got to meet somebody who's a potential YouTuber. I may be doing some collabs and working with, doing paranormal work. We'll see. And I got another guy to meet as well. I got to arrange a meeting with. So I've had 2 or 3 people contact me because I put a post out on the Derby Reddit site about trying to meet up with fellow content creators. Although I did one tonight and I made a post and somebody said, am I interested in making OnlyFans content? And I kind of said, no, thank you. No. I mean, no doubt the point of making more money than us YouTubers, but no, it's not my cup of tea, really. So, yes. So, look fine. Well, thank you, Aaron. And then Perro says, well, Ibn Fadlan did leave written record of the Varangian people from the Rus wearing tattoos. Well, yes, that's fundamentally true, but it could also actually be henna, because certainly when Eggle was digging at Coppergate, they found a massive ball of henna dye. So whether that was also a thing and the tattoos were actually not tattoos, were actually just painted on, that could also be a thing. But of course, in logical argument, when it comes to syllogisms, you need 2 forms of an argument to create a proof. And we got Ibn Fadlan on the one hand, but we need more accounts. And it's a damn shame we've not really found many Norse bodies in bogs, because the day when they discover a Norse warrior from the 8th century or the 9th century, and is being found in the bog, preserved, and he's got covered in tattoos, is the day when that history dramatically changes. But I don't see why not. But would it be a widespread practice? Is the other system we need to understand as a belief system? So, because it takes more research, in my mind, I don't see why not. But then again, I don't really recall any accounts from the Anglo-Saxons talking about the Norse warriors being covered in tattoos. And again, did the Anglo-Saxons use tattoos? So, I think it's something I really got to look into a little bit more in depth. But I just don't understand why we'd have tattoos in the past before that and why they would disappear. And if you ever go to Amsterdam, I do urge you to go and check out the Tattoo Museum, because that's fascinating how people, donate their tattoos after they die. And some of the tattoos on there are just incredible. And I've had lots of friends with tattoos. And I got a friend of mine called Rob in the American Civil War, and he's absolutely covered in tattoos, and as well as piercings. And he's also a fascinating individual and character. I've not seen for many years. In fact, I've got his Civil War jacket still in my trunk, which I want to give back, because I think it's very important that you hand that you're being lent back eventually. But yeah. So let's finish on this comment. So thank you for the stream, says Aaron. Well, you're more than welcome. I will be back tomorrow night, all being well, because I've got no plans tomorrow night to go out and do anything, being a Sunday. So watch out for that live stream. And again, we'll get into depth talking about what we're doing. If I do some filming tomorrow, if it's a bit cool in a Viking, I may be dressed as a Viking, but I may not. And then just for the last comment of the day, this is a bipolar system. So either could be right or wrong, both being correct. Well, again, it very well could be when it comes to, if you're talking about tattoos. So, it just depends on what percentage of people had them. So, and of course, we know that lots of cultures had tattoos. So, yeah, I think more research, and then we could do a very much in-depth video. But I do know it's a stuff that we talked about in the vlog series. And I don't know if we made a dedicated video about tattoos, but we certainly covered it in the vlog series. And perhaps I should separate those into separate videos from Eggle, because his knowledge was very knowledgeable. And as time progresses and archaeology progresses, we'll discover more. So on that point on the video, I just want to say thank you guys for being here. Do go and check out tonight's long format video if you've not watched it so far. It's a celebration of 10,000 subscribers. I filmed a couple of weeks ago, and it's unboxing 2 swords, and one of them's here in my hand. And I must say, I love this. It's really nice. And for Celtic Red Merchant, I think it's a really nice blade, but I'd love to find out if they make combat blade. It's got a nice wooden mounting. The leather's really nice. It smells nice. It's got some nice embossing on this bit of the top shape, whatever you may call it, and some nice spheres on the bottom. And of course, they're there for a reason, to stop you from wearing away the bottom of the shape when it hits the ground. So again, it's practical and it's got a use. And the handle is very unique as well. I love a much highly decorated one with inlay. So it's goodbye from me. Have a wonderful night wherever you may be in the world, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. And yeah, I think tomorrow I'm probably going to put out the resilience video, but I do relate it to my life as well. So this is a journey where I'm discovering what I've been through, but also trying to help people. So that's the plan for tomorrow's long format video, which will be out at 5 in the afternoon UK time. That'll be like 6 o'clock in Scandinavia, and around about 11 o'clock in the morning or midday in America. God knows it'll be God knows it'll be like 3 in the morning in New Zealand and Australia. So yes, goodbye. Thank you for hanging about with me. I love it when I hang about in these live streams, and I've just wished that I did more of them in the past. So this is going to be a regular feature every week, and we're not going to stop live streaming from now on. So off for 10 says, thank you, Braggy. See you later. Have a nice day, chat. I will do, my friend. And I just want to say, love you guys to bits, and let's make the world a better place. Onwards and upwards, as Eggle would say. Bye! I'm going now.